Because any time that the conversation moves into a concept like neo-feudalism, I'm like, all right, yeah, we're gonna hit the record now. We're gonna get to the other fun things. I'm talking today with Malcolm Waugh, who has been gracious enough to share with me uh, a review copy of Dog Eaters and some great bio information that goes along with it and characters. And as we started just preparing to hit record, he brings up neo feudalism, at which point I figure we have to hit record. So I love this idea that you're just talking about where, yeah, you think of the, previous version of feudalism as we understand it, perhaps related as it's most frequently associated with like the Middle Ages and this concept of you work the land that's owned by somebody else, you're tied to that land, you're basically giving your life for that land, for the right to work it under somebody else's authority, and your existence is based on how long you can maintain productivity on that land. Basically how long you're useful, that's how long you get to exist in that place. In a neo feudalism approach, what are we talking about that might seem different and yet also like a natural evolution of this history?
Well, multinational corporations, which pretty much, I mean, if not rule the world, totally influence it. I mean, we're talking about people like Bill Gates, Soros, these kind of people. Their tentacles are, Goldman Sachs. The tentacles transcend national boundaries. And transcend the politicians' lifespans in terms of like, okay, 4 years, 4 years, 4 years. It's like a bureau, it's so deep. It's a foundation, and you have all this other stuff that's just kind of like frosting on a cake, but the cake remains hidden, not only hidden, but it stays long after the frosting has been, melted away.
One of the biggest challenges I have, this idea about things that are being created for, an effect that generations will be feeling, while those who are pushing them through don't seem to care about that idea. Like it's like it's that same idea of like, it's not me.
It's about, well, yeah, it is, lifespan. People don't think, how many people have even written a will. But the thing is that education about the history, the real history, not just dates of when a battle was fought and won, but why those battles were fought and why they were won or lost. It's like the American Revolution. Oh, the Boston Tea Party. That was a proxy war between France and England.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, freedom, whatever, or, and just the way that the framing of history doesn't give us the real meaning behind what humans, the motivation of humans is. So anyway,
perfect example. That's a great example because, you can look at it as like, oh, wow, it's this great fight for freedom by this young upstart throwing off colonialism. Okay, but you're also looking at the investment opportunity of the sides who are helping them because they know this is a rich land of resources that they can help take advantage of by providing support now and then getting payment for it later. It changes context when you view it a little bit deeper, right? It's like you pull back and you're like, oh, look at this. Here we go. So you said now we're taking that idea. We're talking about a future where we've had a die-off, where there's just a small population left, and those who can, essentially control resources are apparently the big players on the field.
Yeah, it's so basically, Dog Eaters is a response, a reaction to what was happening, which started basically, after 9/11. Before 9/11, the end of the 1990s, I went, traveling. Oh, it was just so easy. The travel, the feeling, everything. I mean, yeah, we had the early Gulf War, the first Gulf War with Bush, the first Bush, but still, you know, and we had a lot of feeling of freedom, and money was easier. Of course, now we realize that money is kind of fake, and you know, this kind of like these bubbles are induced. But back then, it was kind of like, then we had 9/11 and all the mythology around that. But what happened was, you know, things like the first celebrities, you know, Lindsay Lohan and Hilton.
You don't have to try and remember too many names. I won't recall many. I'm the one who most often will look at my wife when someone appears on the screen and I'll go, is that person famous? And she'll let me know, like, oh yeah, or, you know, they're famous for this. And then I sort of know the context, which is interesting because you're describing a similar idea. Around 2000, the late 90s, after this moment, there became this concept of people who were famous for reasons other than what had traditionally been a reason to be considered a celebrity. You were a film or television celebrity, or you were a sports celebrity of some degree, but there was just, you know, a couple of definitions of it. And it seems it's greatly expanded since 9/11, since the early 2000s and everything that transpired.
Influencers and everything. But the seed of that celebrity culture, the seed of the sort of this distractions, these, in a way, it's kind of like pseudo religion. It's kind of like, and you know, they come and go quickly. God and goddesses also came and went. We still remember some of them, but like these little idols, it's kind of like animism. You know, they're in the jungle, and then there's these little shrines to these gods and goddesses scattered around, which, you know, it's now in the contemporary state, where there's, you know, tons of it in tons of different places, like, you know, different social media, different, you know, TikTok or Instagram or this kind of thing, where they're, or sports or whatever, music, entertainment. But as this culture was building, I mean, we've always had some of this, but it's really exploded, this distraction and the kind of like the never-ending wars without any explanation, and just this general degeneration of culture and politics and manners, basically. And so this kind of feeling that I had to be, you know, was expressed in initially a screenplay called Dog Eaters, and this won 3 awards at the Screenwriting Expo in LA, Screenwriting Expo 5. So at this time, this is before subprime, and there was a lot of like free floating money, a lot of European money, and movies, things were getting made that was like so terrible, really, back then. And so what happened was, these contests, it was kind of like the height of these contests right before subprime, when all the money disappeared. But 3 awards, one was a management, a literary management, one was action adventure, and one was the Dable Brothers Award, which was to adapt the screenplay into 6 issues of comic issues, and then compiled into a graphic novel. And so that was my introduction into creating comics. So
I enjoyed some of the things you mentioned. You know, you offered some great notes regarding that experience and how you felt that there was a very prescient moment when I believe maybe it was one of the Dable brothers, maybe it was someone else who was talking with you and said, yeah, you can turn it into a movie, but there's other options. And you felt, okay, well, there's clearly a reason why you brought up these other options as a possibility and a suggestion, and how that became a great opportunity for you to explore when you're considering what the alternative might be. And it seemed as though in this instance, going in the direction of the graphic novel was one that was going to really benefit you. Was there
the thing about opportunity, or even like, you know, when if you're doing some kind of acting exercise, it's all about saying yes, because once you say no, it's over.
Right, everything stops, right? But you're trying to almost create this moment magic, you know, other reality. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so if you say yes, I mean, you can get into a lot of trouble too. You can go into debt, totally. But the thing is that, okay, so what is it all about? You know, what are you saving up to be? You know, that kind of thing. There's a great line in Platoon. I don't think you can say it anymore, so I won't say it. I don't know if you remember it.
Yes, it's one of my wife's favorite movies. In fact, I can also say, just as an interesting twist, because my wife is Filipina, and when she heard the term dog eaters for the title, she instantly said, "Oh, this is interesting. I'm curious about the material." Because for her, this is a derogatory term that she's heard used, applied to her culture, that she is aware of has been applied to other cultures. And she actually has a really a great book by Jessica Hagedorn called Dog Eaters.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So it was really interesting for me for that, you know, just awareness of thinking, hey, I've heard this before. What's the name of that book? And when I mentioned it to her, we had this great little exchange in this idea. So, you know, you're bringing up this idea of like, you know, what opportunities look like, and also, you know, when it comes along with it, what meanings are to people, you know, how it is that you're creating definitions of meanings for people, you know, based on how you're defining things like dog eaters, like the concept of neo-feudalism and others. I just wanted to enjoy that for a second because
well, the thing about yeah, it's a derogatory term actually in the graphic novel as well, but it's not anything that's dwelled upon. There's no real discriminatory. I mean, there are, of course, villains, enemies that in the story they're called roaches, and they're the offspring, the descendants of prisoners in the maximum security prisons. So basically, they were shielded from the die-off. Mm. So basically, Dog Eaters takes place 175 years after the die-off. And
you place it in the U.S. Southwest.
Yes, in the U.S. Southwest. And the Black Dog Clan, first of all, mankind failed to transcend the petroleum age.
Yes.
175 years after the die-off, civilization consists of scattered nomadic tribes, isolated casino cities, and roving swarms of predatory bandits. These are the roaches. The Black Dog Clan makes its way down the trade route between the casino cities of the American Southwest on their way to establish their own city on the Gulf. So basically, it's a turn of history. You know, like the so-called Wild Wild West is actually a very short period of time. It's yes. like 20 years, basically. And then the white man just destroyed the Plains Indians' ability to have food. They killed all the buffalo, the bison, right. And they ran a railroad track right through it, you know, which the Chinese built.
They also demonstrated some pretty ugly early versions of chemical warfare against the Cherokee tribes and the Trail of Tears, disease blankets, you know,
all that stuff,
food and things like that.
So you know, the Wild West period was actually very, very short. I mean, based on the amount of movies and whatever, you kind of think it's like, you know, lasted a long time. There's a lot of history there, but it's really quite short. And so 175 years after the die-off, is a long period of time.
Yes.
Really long period of time. We're talking about, you know, the 1800, almost 200 years ago. So yeah, 1800s, you know, so the difference between the 1800s and now.
Mm-hmm.
And so if, you know, everything breaks down, and then you have this kind of like, where most apocalyptic stories are, is like, you know, people just like, you know, it's just like total chaos, total barbarism. But we're starting to build out of that again. And so it's starting to coalesce. Culture is starting to coalesce. Civilization is starting to coalesce around casino cities. And it's building back up. And this way of life, this nomadic way of life, this kind of warfare that civilization is coming back. And this is right at the cusp of that. This story is set at that time. They're giving up their nomadic life to build their own civilized situation on the Gulf. And
which is actually a goal of the Black Dog Clan, right? There's
yes,
or at least a goal, you know, their desire to, you know, create their own source of revenue by creating one of these casino cities that can sustain and also kind of put down roots and things like that.
Yeah, it's not necessarily casino based, but you know, they're going to be on the Gulf. They're going to have food. They're going to have a food supply. They're going to, you know, they're going to be able to trade and, you know, be a trading center basically down there.
So a different intention altogether. They're not here to prey on the people. It's almost like creating an outlet where others can come, exchange resources, and
yeah, they're nomadic
trading,
basically nomadic trading clan at the moment, but they're moving away from that because that way of life is changing. They have to evolve out of it as times change to you know, for the next generation, thinking about the next generation of
yeah, I'm curious about that because in the excerpt you shared with me, the first issue section that I got a chance to read, they're in the process of transporting when things go awry. They come across a dead roach and they're, you know, suspicious, and with good reason. Yes, because there's an ambush. But I was thinking about, okay, so what's a valuable resource at this time? What are they transporting that's important enough for them to clearly be getting paid for it? I'm guessing as security or even just as basic transportation. And what resources are considered valuable? Mm-hmm. Is petroleum still something that's, you know, the one of those bartering tools, much like it exists in our world right now? Are there other resources like maybe clean water, different, you know? Food,
yeah, their vehicles are solar based.
Okay.
And solar photovoltaic. I mean, we don't get into technical details. It's
right.
You know, it's a story.
Sure.
And they're basically they pick up things to trade. In the screenplay, it's much more clearly defined. There are I would call it, you know, places where people meet at a certain time to trade and to share different resources from different parts of the country. And then they, you know, continue down to, you know, basically it's like a tinker, but I mean, it's on a larger scale, much larger scale. So you have traveling, you know, people that travel and transport and, you know, trade.
Certainly. I teach a book called Station 11. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, for one of my classes, and a couple classes now. And in it, there's, you know, another example, you know, that reminds me of moments where it's like the main characters in that story, especially in the post-apocalyptic future, are part of a traveling band of musicians and artists who go around performing because that's really all they've got. And for some, they join because there's security there and it's not a requirement to like fight or loot or plunder or be part of a gang or things like that. So, you know, it's interesting that there's like there's not many, but there's a few avenues to choose. And that in this regard also, there's this changing of a generation. 175 years, you're about to have this development that's moving away from the roving and moving into the settling, something that we can see in our own history in the past where there were, periods of disruption. You think of the fall of the Roman Empire. I loved your example in your synopsis you shared with me about the concept of Rome burning. What if Rome continued to burn, and placing that idea here? So we are, interestingly enough, dealing with, this idea of like, okay, the house is burned down. And I'm going to ramble on a tangent if you don't mind, but it reminds me of the TV show, The Newsroom, which I was a fan of. And there's an episode where they're talking with the climatologist who's like, yeah, so, tell us where we are right now. And he's like, okay, imagine there's a house on fire. And he's like, okay. And he goes, okay, imagine the house is burned down. And he's like, okay. And he's like, that's it. That's where we are. And he's like, what if we did, cleaner fuel and solar and this and that? He's like, 30 years ago, that would have been amazing. He's like, now the house is burned down. I'm sorry, the house is burned down.
And now we've moved into a tent, and if we're lucky, we have a mobile home. And that's where the Black Dog Clan is basically large armored mobile homes, man, with turrets and firepower and,
Yeah, I love the design and first appearance of the Black Dog Clan when they're moving through on that cool semi and, everyone's kind of perched around. And then you have a great cast of characters as well. I'm going to jump to that in a second because for one moment, I want to follow back on something you brought up that was, I think, really important. You mentioned that you took this from a screenplay, around 118 pages, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And through that process, you were describing how earlier you had some things that were more clearly defined in that screenplay that you had to modify in order to make them fit within the graphic novel.
Yeah, the adaptation from the screenplay to the graphic novel or to the comic required consolidating, cutting, editing. So it is a the interpersonal relationships are less are streamlined. They're richer in the screenplay. There's more the B stories. Basically, we have an A story and a B story. The A story is the main plot. The B story is relationships. And so the B stories in the screenplay are more defined and more complicated. So you
Certainly.
get not as much as, say, a 16 episode series or, a mini series or anything like that. It doesn't get, as deep as that, but, it's deeper anyway.
No, I understand. And the great thing is I love thinking about how many projects started out as a film because that was the only way it could start. And then later someone gets to follow up and do a series where you expand on all of these great moments you would have enjoyed doing more with and going longer for. I love the idea that you're doing it as a graphic novel, but, as a comic book, as a series collected as well, that could also be turned into a film at some point in the future again, or take on life in a series or some other form, because you've already created a visual interpretation of the story now. And with pieces that are really compelling, you can create an audience that's really hungry for like, okay, this was great. Where's the one I can sink my teeth into for 16 episodes and really like find out all of the depth and nuance? Because you mentioned the complications. So I'm going to take an opportunity to dive into some of our characters here. We've been talking about the Black Dog Clan. We should probably, I should be responsible and include some of the things who they are so you can tell us more about them. We've got Dad Lamont and his wife matriarch Rebecca, and they've got Tomahawk Tommy. He's the eldest son. We've also got the youngest daughter, Tracy. And then we have the complications you were describing. Stevie, loyal lieutenant, who finds himself at odds with Lamont when they both are going for Angie. And it only gets more complicated when you've got the loyalty of characters like Chunga. And is it Bevan or Bevan?
Bevan, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He's this stranger that triggers the ambush that warns the Black Dog Clan in the initial opening sequence that there is an ambush, and so picking up strangers is not really something that Lamont does. He doesn't trust outsiders, and this mistrust of Bevan is a major factor for what happens later in the story.
There's also, some reasons behind that. You mentioned in the character bios that he develops a relationship with Tracy, who is someone who is a caretaker for him when he gets injured. And then afterwards, I'm sure the thoughts in Lamont's head, which are, okay, well, I already have issues with you, and now you're, making friends with my family. Okay, how much more of this can I handle before
with my young daughter?
Right. So there's an importance involved there, right? And then on top of it, he's also caught where he, has built this clan with Rebecca, and yet Angie is enough to put him not only at odds with his family potentially, but also risk a friendship with Stevie that's gone on for, well, readers are going to have to read to learn more about, how close their relationship is and how important it is when something like desire comes between the two of them. Also, adding for a great third tension, how do you keep all of this together while you're trying to get to a place where you can set up this outpost and build? You're trying to think about building for the future, and yet the foundation you want to build on could be on the verge of crumbling. You're layering some really great tension throughout.
Yeah,
must have been fun.
Yeah, it's interesting how power. There's some kind of a perspective on power that to some degree affects every leader, who has access to more than other people. It's a responsibility, and I think that every powerful person, every leader has this temptation that they either resist or succumb to, and based on if they're discovered
and what reasons
anything can happen when you put yourself out there.
Right.
Like the Cash App guy, he gets murdered. So those things can happen.
Right. And at first it appears to be one kind of story, and you find out afterwards there's actually much more involved. It's much more complicated, as we all are, right?
Much more sordid and much more disgusting and much more, and yet much more titulating and kind of like, wow, that's kind of interesting. Maybe it was worth it.
Yeah. Well, I'm torn on, this thing that we come back to, I live in that area, I'm right outside of San Francisco. And for me, one of the things that was really important for a lot of people was that the first stories that were coming out, the first things that were being blasted was homeless crime in San Francisco claims yet another bright future. This is all because of poverty and the poor and the downtrodden who are preying on those who are trying to build great life. That's a very different narrative from what we are discovering now. And this idea, right, of power and how those who in power can cast a narrative very quickly on a scene that will influence many. And you can bring this truth out later. And to a degree, it's almost like it's only because this story is so much more sordid and interesting that it becomes something that people go, oh, wow, okay, I'm willing to look past what the initial story was and maybe consider that it was about so much more. But that's only those who are that interested. Others are going to hear, oh, no, I heard he was killed by a homeless person. That's the narrative. This is another example of why power needs to have constant safeguards to protect itself. Why, if you need to find a way to keep that those who are in power, as you point out, what lengths will they go to? Will they be corrupted by that position where they can influence things, where they can play a role? Lord Acton himself, right? Power corrupts. Great power or absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's
And the thing is that the first narrative, the initial narrative, is usually the one that sticks. But I think we have become more aware of how stories are spun. And, if you follow the story more completely, if it's not satisfying, then you'll find, more, you'll get closer to the truth, although that is so elusive. Facts.
And there's plenty of distractions, right?
Yeah.
How many distractions are there out there, as you pointed out?
Yeah.
So I'm really, I like that example that you offered there, because it brings us back to what you were talking about, where the, origin of this story began for you, something that you saw back in the early 2000s, I think they call them the aughts, and this idea of what has transpired just in, say, 20 years. I mean, let's say if we take, 2000 to 2020 to 2023, and you're thinking that much further into 175 years down the road. I'm also going to say
175 years after 2024.
So it's actually 176. We'll see. We'll see. Now, here's the danger. It's not like you wrote this last year. You've been potentially predicting that 2024 could be very interesting just from this story alone. I'm not saying I'm cashing out my stocks or stocking up on water. No. I am keeping in mind, though, that it does give us this sense of just how precarious it can be. How much does it take? We're living in a world right now where in this past 6 months, we've seen 2 major banking institutions go through an amazing fall and only be rescued, in whatever terms that might be defined, for the time being, while it feels as though so many other things are as uncertain as they were in 2007.
Rescued in a way that consolidating. So basically, we're concentrating power again to the top.
Right.
So what happens when it's all at the tip of the pyramid?
And I think that's really important. I was reading an article from The Atlantic today, and it's a recent study published, a book written by a gentleman who's made some success. The name's not coming to me right now. I'll send it to you, and I'll include it in the notes for anyone who's interested. But it's a very in-depth study. And this is someone whose previous book won a Pulitzer Award for the work that he did investigating another incident. But he describes how the profiting that occurs off of the lower income communities, it's how those in power stay in power. It's how they constantly maintain leverage. And the example you're describing there, yet another example of narrowing who actually has access to what and who is controlling all of these different factors and how much they're pushing down on the others. It's amazing that no one seems 176 years later to be worried about that sort of risk as they're starting to build these communities, whether it's a healthy sort of wholesome approach like the Black Klan's considering, or, I'm sorry, but I hear the word Casino City and immediately I just think of like a leech, just something that's designed to suck away money and life from anything that comes in to that environment. I've never heard someone say, yeah, I came away with so much more when I went to like Vegas or Atlantic City or Macau or something like that. They're like, yeah, I ended up with all this extra money. It's just so great every time. It's like, no,
well, I don't. We know some people that do win at Vegas, so
yeah, no, and those who do, but you keep in mind, it's like, when you look at how many lottery tickets are sold and how many win, that's always just one of those reflections. This idea of like
online sports gambling is just, I think there's 30 states now where it's legal, and I can't see where that's going to be helpful for most people. I'm sure there's going to be a few people that win. And when they win, they're going to be like glorified and, just like a lottery winner, like $1 billion lottery winner, like, that's me. I'm going to do that. I don't think so. Not necessarily. So, there's going to be more opportunities for addiction, more opportunities for suicide, more opportunities for substance abuse. It just opens up these cans of worms that keep opening up. marijuana legalization, basically. I mean, I'm all for that, but what happens is it becomes corporatized. So it's like my friend, longtime friend, is basically a cannabis lawyer in San Francisco, or Oakland, actually. And, he was like pushing for it. And I was telling him, man, the corporation is going to take it over, and it's going to be, it's going to be taken out of the hands of normal people. And he goes, "That's America." And then, years later, I just remind him of that. And I go, "That's America, right?" And yeah, that's America. So the thing is that as the haves and have-nots, the gap between them grows and grows. And as energy, I mean, it's like in England, oh yeah, wood. We need wood for to burn things, of course. Then it's coal. First they're making ships for the Navy, so they decimate, Nottingham, whatever, Sherwood Forest. They go to coal because they need. They're getting cotton. They have to the mills, iron, tin, all the natural resources that were in England. England had coal and tin and wood and all that stuff. Then they had to go outside and, whaling for the oil for the lamps. Oh, we almost killed all the whales. Oh, we just found petroleum. Now we're using up all the petroleum. Oh, we're going electric. Oh, the lithium. Where is all that stuff? Oh, we used all that. So basically, we're just going through all of the natural resources. And, when we run out and mankind fails to transcend the petroleum age, we got dog eaters.
Right. We're 175 years later. We're in this violent future where, you have to fight for the right to continue existing. You have to find your own way to manage that. I'm going to take a moment and just sort of rewind for a second because, I really enjoyed reading your, insights on how there was a period where you enjoyed writing, you had a negative response from a teacher, and it took a while for you to begin investing in it again. But the result turned into winning awards for a screenplay and later into this project. I'm curious, what was it like to embrace writing again and do so with this purpose of seeing the world the way it was and to recognize like something's happening here and I have an opportunity to take what I'm seeing and tell a story about what happens when it all goes so far and so wrong, and we end up with a world in which dog eaters is not only likely, it completely makes sense 176 years later. When you were starting out with this, was the narrative as grand as you have made it now? Did it start with a small idea with like, let's start with a clan, and the Black Dogs, and then build out like, okay, so what are they fighting against? Or did you see a bigger story right from the beginning? Because I think that part of the process is always so interesting with creativity, where it comes from, how it begins, and that growth and evolution, I think is always really amazing.
Well, my creative journey, if I want to be so grandiose as to call it that.
Be grandiose. This is the place to do it. If you claim it, exclaim it, and go for it.
Yeah, I took some writing courses in college, and my writing teacher, creative writing teacher, said, "Oh, you could get this published." It was a short story, and it's like, oh, whatever. I didn't follow up, but because I had a bad romantic experience, I had to express a certain kind of honesty. I got into sculpture. I was doing so it was sort of fine arts, became a fine art major and psychology double major, and got into the conceptual side of art. And my master's thesis was a 1-hour film, actually, It was a 1-hour film. And when I moved from Hawaii to Japan, where I live now, and I parlayed that, using that as a kind of a resume, the film, to doing music videos. I was doing music, directing and producing music videos, and doing some music, which I'd been doing, for the film and whatever. So, it's a very, low level thing. And one of our friends came, had an exhibition in Ginza. She came from Hawaii. She was exhibiting. And one of the people she was traveling with was a fortune teller. And I was like, oh yeah, I read my fortune, doing, written these, actually, I was writing novels at the time. So what do you think, should I, do that? And she goes, yeah, you have a talent for writing. What about music? What about film? She goes, no, do the writing. So I wrote some novels, three of them. And I actually had literary representation in New York and London. None of them were published, thankfully, because they were the sort of the Jay McInerney kind of amoral situation, sort of seedy underbelly, strippers, photographers, yakuza, this kind of stuff, and actually not a healthy thing. So from writing that story, that novel, Grown in Camera, I had a motorcycle accident and I was in the hospital. And one of the fathers of one of my sons, they were classmates. He came to visit. He's a doctor. He was looking at my X-rays, and then he mentioned that his mother was a screen supervisor for he worked with Spielberg and whatever, and just turned it into a screenplay. So that's how I got into writing screenplays. And that screenplay, Grown in Camera, actually did get was also a small contest winner, and it was optioned, but again, thankfully it wasn't made, because I would have gone off the rails, just in a wrong direction, would have sent me in the wrong direction. So my path led to more of a, even though it does contain those elements of sex and violence, it's not totally fixated in a negative way, which, as you see from what's going on now, a lot of what's going on in the media and entertainment is pretty unhealthy, I think. The music,
there are plenty of examples that support that. Yeah.
And it's so powerful, visual and music. The combination can be very, very hypnotizing, very powerful. It can bend your mind. Like, I think, you can call it, they reflect off each other. Art imitates life, imitates art, imitates life, and it just becomes, it's an echo chamber that becomes really concentrated. It kind of like focuses on a certain aspect of it. I think Scarface, which was a great movie, was really, really unhealthy. Really, really bad, but really, really good. You know what I'm saying?
It's still considered extremely powerful. I can think of moments from it that still resonate with me, simply because they showed something that had never been seen before. They brought to life things that people who had experienced them could say, "Oh yeah, I know the darker version of that story."
Copying that. Also, sure. Godfather. Just the mentality, the idolization of, right down to the dialogue. It's like so powerful, these kind of things. So basically, they're great. I love them, but I also love heroin. That kind of. I love fentanyl.
So I'm curious about.
But anyway,
this.
So that's where my writing went into. And then I wrote Dog Eaters based on, you know, what we've discussed before, and you know, continuing to write along writing stories now that I feel are important to express. So taking it beyond just action adventure, trying to do that anyways. Genre, not gender, but genre crossing.
Understood.
But even that, like what I'm writing now, is also combining those kind of things together in a way that is natural and you know, kind of like, you know, it's like not far future. The next one I wrote was Sacred Profanity, which is also a first place winner, action adventure for Story Pros. I'm just looking at it right now. Yeah, Story Pros, and that's set in 2055. So you know, again, knowing what's going on in Hollywood. Now, another thing that's gone on is that we're understanding more and more about how the entertainment world, I mean, for ordinary people, unless, you know, from the outside looking in, music, you know, unless you've actually been there working, you don't, and even then, you know, the Me Too and all this stuff, you know, that's always happened. That's always been from the very beginning of movies and whatever. Sex has been a transactional way. Transactional. Sex has always been transactional in entertainment from way, you know, historically. And yet now we you know, because of Me Too, like, so all this stuff starts coming out, and then people are starting to see that not just in entertainment, but in religion and every organization, you have these situations, sports, government, everything, education, everything. And so what happens is you start to see this, and it's not as, you know, bright and shiny as it originally, you know, looked before.
I'm curious. It's clear that when you were working on projects like the novels or Ronin Camera, that you were working, you know, towards something that was interesting to readers or to viewers. That you're working on an idea that's going to be compelling and gripping, and yet there's a change that occurs when you start working on Dog Eaters. And I'm curious, was it gradual, or was there an intent from the moment you started working on Dog Eaters that there was a clear awareness in your mind of like, this is very different from what I've been doing. I'm doing this for reasons that are different. Or was it something that you recognized later and you saw that at some point there was this clear delineation from what you had been sort of pursuing and focusing on, as you mentioned with the other projects, to what you're doing now, and, you know, also how you view those previous projects?
So Ronin Camera was basically the first major, you know, novel length. I mean, we're talking 400 pages, right, of prose. And then I, before Destiny's Child, the music group, I had a story called Destiny's Child. And then yet another one, which the title escapes me right now. But basically just trying to be entertaining in a titillating way. Like, this is cool, this is sexy, you know, in kind of like, this is entertainment or something. This is, you know, in that way. And then when I got to, you know, after that, you know, just kind of after, you know, kind of like 9/11 and, you know, this kind of feeling, just, oh, you know, this is disgusting. These aspects of Western culture disgust me. When it all comes tumbling down because it's not sustainable. What's going to happen? So then I did that, and it's just kind of like an action adventure. But then with Sacred Profanity, which is a story that started as a screenplay, and it's the log line is, in a dystopian, balkanized America, meaning that what we're seeing now, the polarization of the coasts, the interior, red, blue, left, right, Democrat, Republican, Trump, Rhino, Biden, AOC, or whatever. You know, we're seeing this balkanization, the polarization, the splitting apart. America's no ununited states of America. It's still the USA, but it's not. It's the ununited. So basically, in a dystopian, balkanized America, a journalist investigating the assassination of a charismatic spiritual teacher must elude the death squads of both the UN peacekeepers and the divine faith to find and reveal the truth and witness the resurrection. So moving away from this physical world of, like, you know, politics, established religion, this kind of thing, and going to other, I guess you would call it, dimensions or consciousness, to see if there's a way out before we get to the die-off. Is there a way out? Can we transcend the petroleum age? So that's what Sacred Profanity, that story, is about. And then the story I'm writing now is still kind of untitled, but it's based kind of now. And it's about who's watching the watchers, who watch the watchers, who watch the watchers. So Watchman was like, who watches the watchers?
Right.
But now we have these agencies, these new agencies, beyond the CIA, ODNI. You know, there's a, you know, and there's the misinformation or disinformation. You know, they're monitoring everything now. You know, beyond Twitter files and all this stuff. So basically, it's who is being able to oversee all of this and sort of mold the narrative. So that's what I'm working on now, and it's tough. It's a tough one.
I can imagine. You know, there's plenty of things I think that you would want to sort of weigh against each other for how much can you include as new information is coming out so often.
Exactly.
These days about who's doing what and what roles are being played. But I'm really intrigued by this progression in your works, simply because when you're talking about Sacred Profanity, there's a clear delineation from something like Ronin Camera. You know, this idea of, like, one is about, you know, the seedy, the sexy, the thrilling, the titillating, and another is about, okay, what is truth when it's something that two sides who normally would oppose each other both are willing to unite to suppress. And this idea of going beyond that to now thinking about when you're thinking about the dog eaters, right? So far in the future that now these other stories that you're talking about, for example, with Sacred Profanity, it's almost like, is there a turn before we get to dog eaters? And now, even with the project you're in now, how much can be understood about what events are transpiring and who is doing the pulling of different strings and what those strings look like compared to what we might imagine them. But also, now it's almost like you're showing us moments where maybe something could change, maybe, like you said, with sacred profanity, a left or a right turn could be made that takes us from going straight into dog eaters. Or maybe it's just a branch that gives us a chance until we just end up right back where we're going to end up all along.
Yeah, I mean, it's
go ahead.
it's, you know, if you have been following any of the Atlantean, you know, stories about Atlantis and stuff like that, it's like it's a different technology, and yet because we're human, we have the same faults. We have the same imperfections that always cause the downfall, basically. And so, you know, 10,000 years, 15,000 years later, we start again, you know, from come out of the cave, you know, whoever survives comes out of the cave, whatever, you know, this kind of thing.
It seems like
there's that theory. And then another theory, which I'm, you know, going to work on later, but I'm not going to talk about
it. No, I think technology
is my own personal NDA.
Gotcha. No, yeah, that's an allusion to a little something we got to chat about before I hit record. But I'm really interested in the idea you're mentioning there, because it's, no matter how far advanced Atlantis might have been, no matter how far advanced other societies might have existed prior to the last 250, maybe 600 years of recorded history as we understand it, and the growth and development that come with it, and what technologies and knowledge was sort of gained or lost. You know, my mind always goes to the Library of Alexandria and what could have been if that knowledge had not been destroyed. But through it all, there's almost like this idea that we can be better with technology. And yet you've already mentioned it since the beginning of this recording, that there is a need, as described, just as you really well summarized with the idea of Atlantis and us. The technology can get better, but if we don't transcend with the technology, at some point, the technology turns around like a magnifying glass and just continues to expound the flaws that are our eventual downfall. But in the process, it's like, if we don't transcend with the technology, if we create advancements that we are not able to use to, you know, sort of say like, hey, in order to use this technology in a healthy way, we need to come up here. We need to lift ourselves up beyond our current flaws, petty needs, things like that. We are doomed. That technology will eventually be our downfall. This craving.
Technology is a tool.
Right.
That's all it is. But what happens is tools become weaponized. It's like when the English, I always come back to the England, because they are basically the core of what contemporary Western culture and civilization has become. They're the foundation of it. I mean, you talk Greece, Rome, whatever, but no, the banking systems and all this kind of stuff is, you know, kind of started with England. And what they did when they were exploring the Pacific, you know, the Friendly Isles, you know, Hawaii, whatever, they were helped, they were aided, you know, they're fed and given things. So it's like, oh, what can we give in return? Oh, they don't have iron. Let's give them knives. You know, in the, you know, New Guinea and this area here. Let's give them knives. So what happens is those tribes that got the knives turn them into weapons and kill their enemies. And this is what happens is like, you know, oh, they're primitive, but we do the same thing. It's like, oh, we have a gun. It's a tool, right?
But if we are not in a place where we can use tools responsibly, if we allow our flaws to control how we use these tools, then we are warping those tools because of the way we're using them. And that warping is, in most cases, destructive. You don't split an atom. You don't, you know, create cold fusion. You don't develop a weapon and at some point think that your flaws can't be part of it undoing you. You know, it's
and it's absolutely true. Guns don't kill people. People kill people, and that's absolutely true. So what's the solution?
Right.
Oh, we gotta ban guns. No, we gotta ban people. So with dog eaters, you have this internal conflict as well as having to deal with an external conflict, and that's kind of like the you know, how that gets resolved within this story, and how you know, how the next generation proceeds from this journey.
And yet I have to wonder, you know, you look at the present day, right? You look at how many people have so many of their needs taken care of. They have all of these amenities, and yet I'm not aware of them letting us know that they have transcended to a degree that they can show the rest of the community, if not the world at large, how to transcend to a degree that we can find ourselves able to move beyond a need for things like resources to be controlled and power and petroleum and things like that. And if they can't do it, flip forward to 175, 176 years later, where as a caravan, your whole thing is about how do you survive moving from place to place? Will there be what you need in each place you go to? Can you build up enough to eventually set up this trade post? How then is it going to be possible for anyone in that environment where fighting to live every day is probably such a primary focus, that thinking about your fellow man, thinking about those around you, thinking about trying to build a better future than the one that was destroyed and then created the present you're living in now, it's quite a challenge. You know, how can you in a new world avoid the traps and failings that destroyed the old one? Is it possible? Can we rise above our human flaws in a post-apocalyptic world?
Humans unite when there's outside aggression, outside threats. Ronald Reagan said it. The world will unite when aliens attack us. But see, all that does is upscale.
Right.
That just upscales. So basically what happens in dog eaters is you have the threat, the constant threat of the roaches, different swarms of roaches. They're not united. It's constant. And then dealing with this threat is what has kept the clan together. You know, Rebecca chastises Lamont for his infidelity. And then he comes back with, haven't I always protected this clan? What if there were no threats? That behavior becomes inexcusable? Because I've protected, because I have a defense system, you know? Is that good enough? Is that good enough to validate my position as a leader of this clan?
And if there was a change that threatened that validation, that justification, that need, if a transcendence said that is a secondary role to a primary concern of which should be your focus, and while it does hold a value, it's secondary or tertiary, maybe even because of what's of a greater importance, how then will the actions used to justify those reasons, you know, hold up? As you pointed out, can they be validated when suddenly something else replaces? If that threat of the roaches was removed, would the justification for why things were done, you know, there's a great parallel to events in which people are put under high stress and suddenly groups divide and actions are taken, and then suddenly there's the relief of that tension, and everyone has to look at who they became during those moments of great tension, during that period where there was great unrest and uncertainty, and people chose to act out of their own self-preservation or what they believed was important in the moment. And out with a little bit of time, looking back, as you pointed out, you know, a threshold was reached when it came to what was considered a traditional transactional method of things being done, whether it's in entertainment or others. And once that place was reached, it was like, okay, the exchange no longer, you know, it doesn't work. It no longer
Values
has
change. Values change.
Values change. So if values change for the Black Dog Clan, you know, what then changes for their relationships as a clan? Does a clan still hold together? Does someone like Lamont still hold the, you know, authority and role of protector if protection isn't needed anymore? Can infidelities be overlooked anymore, or be sort of put to the side in pursuit of a greater goal?
Trade-off. It's a trade-off.
Right.
So what is acceptable 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago may not be acceptable now, or what was acceptable 2 years ago is not acceptable now. And those
also,
those
interestingly,
things,
oh, sorry, we had an overlap.
Those things are right now accelerating in terms of what is acceptable and not acceptable. I mean, just look at Bud Light.
In reference to their recent campaign and the backlash they've had for
I mean,
a member of the
suddenly
community.
Maybe 5 years ago that would work. Maybe 2 years ago it would work, but 2 weeks ago it doesn't work. You know, so the culture right now, we're in a very accelerated situation culturally. I think things are changing so quickly, it's hard to keep up. And in terms of entertainment, film, I mean, you go back to the original Star Wars, the original Mary Poppins, you know, and then you see how these things have evolved. And I'm not into Star Wars now or something, you know. I'm not into Iron Man now or Marvel now. The first one was great. So you see how things change. They try to keep the same thing, trying to extend the universe, but the universe is changing. And so now what it means to be an American is changing as well. And that's kind of like where we're headed towards a die-off.
And through that, what will survive afterwards is something somewhat similar to what we're talking about now, this division of clans, this grouping up based on what's important to you, what you're willing to fight for. And I think it's interesting because, you know, you go back to what you were mentioning just a minute ago about values. Also, you know, simply, it's interesting because it's like values existed before certain things came to light. And yet there was in some ways also a system that was designed to keep those things in place for as long as they could. One of the trade-offs with the distraction technology that we do have available is it's given avenues for that information to be disseminated in a way that prior you had to go through a major institution like a publication or a news source, where someone from there has to validate your story and then turn around and say, this is something that can be shared with the public. And
then also too, the transparency, yes, it's readily available, but these institutions from before, the church, the government, from hundreds of years ago, they're doing the same things and worse, but we don't know about it. And then it's all rosied over with glasses that sort of tint our perception of the past, saying that, oh, we can make America great again. We can go back to a more pure time, when actually there's no difference.
Was it really that pure?
That's where it is what has happening is it's concentrated now. And as it gets more and more concentrated, the chance for total collapse becomes greater. So going back to dog eaters, we're building it from the ground up, and yet the same problems exist. So how do we resolve this? And that's one of the, how dog eaters ends. There's this kind of thing. And I'm not going to give it away because I have an NDA.
Yeah. And, I mean, folks, we're going to give you so much that you can use to, whet your appetite. But as far as getting a satisfying meal or a satisfaction from digesting this great material, there's only one way to do it. So with all of that in mind, we've been enticing people for the last hour or so with all of this great information. And at some point they're like, Seth, you have not even given the man a chance to tell us where to go, where to find it, how do we get our hands on it? Where do you send folks who are like, okay, you've hooked me, I just want to get it now?
Well, that's ASAP Imagination in UK, based in UK. They're the current distributor and I guess agent for dog eaters. And they I've had dog eaters has had a number of publishers and distributors. I retain the intellectual property rights. Mm-hmm. But ASAP Imagination, there's a website, there's a shopping site.
I'll include the links for folks on that, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where you find it. It's available in print. Let me get you. It's available in print.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And there's a foreword which talks about, in the beginning, I had a thought that led to a few words, which became a few sentences. And it talks about why I wrote this.
Nice. I love the art.
And in the afterword, it tells about the journey, basically, as an independent. I mean, there's different paths to being a creator. And if you want to retain your property, this is how I did it in the afterword.
Nice.
And, as Seth and I were discussing, we live in neo-feudalistic times where what your labor is done in the service of our overlords, which are corporations, usually. And you're not even allowed to say, sometimes, you're not allowed to say that I did this with an NDA a lot of times. I was telling Seth that there's some creators that have done some amazing things. Emojis and things in the digital realm. I'm talking about young people, millennials, mid-millennials, 30s, late 20s. They are owned, basically. And their creativity is owned. They're not even allowed to say, I did this in their NDA. And that's criminal. I mean, as far as, well, it's not criminal, it's legal. That's the problem. It's perfectly legal. And this is the place where we're finding ourselves in, is that, you know, being in neo-feudalism, we're ruled by multinational corporations, globalists, crossing national boundaries. It's yet another intersecting Venn diagram of authoritarianism, control over individual rights, as they shrink, as surveillance becomes more and more prevalent. So, you know, the afterword tells about the journey that I've taken. It's not easy, and it's not profitable, really. Unless, you know, we're talking about lottery and online gambling. These are carrots that are so far held in front of us that are, you know, the odds of getting that are infinitesimal. So that's my bright ending quote.
And yet at the same time, it's not enough to deter you from working on the project you're working on, or to keep striving to create things that you can maintain, you know, the creative control over, and find ways to continue sharing with the world. I think it's a testament to the fact that these corporations will keep doing the things they're doing. And to a degree, you know, there are those who are going to be sort of bartering for their future by working for someone else now, just so they can find themselves in a place where they can take the leap.
Or selling the rights. Selling the rights. If you're a creator, selling the rights. So right. For example, the sacred profanity, you know, thinking about the current, like I started to get into it, but I got sidetracked.
Sorry about that.
The kind of, no, that was me. Kind of, who would bankroll something like a story like Sacred Profanity? And you start thinking like, you know, it's so tough, extremely tough, even for people that are at the highest level. Now I'm thinking about Maisel, who started the Marvel universe. No, he doesn't have the rights, but he created the structure for Iron Man and all this kind of stuff. Just reading about it this morning. And this guy is at the highest level, and yet, in order to get the funding, billionaire funding, you have to, you know, you have to give up so much of your life to get it done. So like, okay, I make the story, I sell it. And hopefully whoever buys it does it justice, you know.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, the challenge. But I appreciate that you describe your journey in the afterward, because it gives someone an opportunity to then consider it. You know, what does that path look like if I'm choosing to go in this? What are some possible ways it could turn out? You know, there's the hope and glory of buying the lottery ticket and thinking it could be you. And then there's the realization when someone else's number is being read off on the screen and all you have is a piece of paper, and you have to make a choice to sort of invest again. You know, how much of your time and money will you put into this project, knowing that it could turn out as your story went, or as other things might transpire that could be worse, better. The truth is it's so unknown, but you either don't create and sort of tell yourself you'll never get anywhere with it, or you create and you take a chance. And in the end, you know, if it's a pursuit, if it's a calling, at some point, you're right. How much do those things come into what the value of what you've created?
I'm just putting it out in the universe, this idea, and expressing this idea, these ideas, and get it. If, you know, it'll get read somehow. It'll get talked about, you know, like we're talking about it now.
True. And
these ideas go out. And so with that vibration. You know, it's a little pebble that goes thrown in the ocean. And whether the ripples die out or they cause a tsunami, it's all up to timing. Things have to in confluence. It's not just one idea that, oh, this is a great idea. It has to be with timing, with other factors, build it up, and hopefully it comes out.
I can't think of a better place to wrap up, man. One, I want to save your voice, and two, think that that's a really great place for me to leave. It's one of those things that I love about a conversation like this, because that's the reminder, you know, at the end of it, if you're willing to make that choice, well, pick up your pebble, give a big toss, and then get ready to make another pebble or find another one and do it again. And yeah, that's a really great place I'd love to wrap up. Thank you so much, Malcolm. I can't I can't ever thank people who come on enough in the way I would love to show my gratitude for such a great exchange, for such a great conversation. And in my hope that this is another document of art, of creation that people can enjoy. Thank you so much for making it so great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Now we're going to end the recording and talk like civil human beings not being observed. And with that,